The dark waters of the North Atlantic churn beneath a steel-gray sky as a massive Nimitz-class aircraft carrier cuts through the waves, its flight deck alive with the roar of F-18 Super Hornets launching into the storm. Simultaneously, thousands of miles away in the waters off Scotland, a Vanguard-class submarine silently descends into the abyss, carrying enough nuclear firepower to reshape continents. These are not opposing forces but allies. Two nations bound by language, history, and the shared weight of defending the democratic world. Yet beneath that alliance lies a fascinating question that military analysts, historians, and strategists have debated for decades. When it comes to pure military capability, how do the United States and the United Kingdom truly compare? The answer reveals not just numbers and hardware, but the very nature of modern power itself. The United States military operates on a scale that defies easy comprehension. With a defense budget approaching $900 billion annually, America spends more on its armed forces than the next 10 countries combined. This staggering investment translates into a military infrastructure that spans the globe with more than 750 overseas bases and installations, a fleet of 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers that represent more supercarrier capacity than the rest of the world combined, an air force with over 13,000 aircraft, including the world's largest fleet of fifth-generation stealth fighters, and a nuclear arsenal of approximately 5,000 warheads. The sheer magnitude of American military power reflects not just current spending, but decades of accumulated technological advancement, industrial capacity, and strategic positioning that emerged from the Cold War and expanded through the unipolar moment that followed. Yet raw numbers tell only part of the story. The United States has built a military designed for global power projection, capable of fighting multiple major conflicts simultaneously while maintaining peacekeeping operations and deterrence postures across every continent. The United Kingdom, by contrast, operates with a defense budget of approximately $68 billion, roughly 7% of American spending. The British Armed Forces number around 145,000 active personnel compared to America's 1.3 million. Britain maintains two aircraft carriers, the HMS Queen Elizabeth and HMS Prince of Wales, representing the nation's largest warships in history, but still dwarfed by their American counterparts in both size and capability. The Royal Air Force fields roughly 600 aircraft, while the Royal Navy operates fewer than 80 commissioned vessels. These numbers might suggest overwhelming American superiority, but such a conclusion would fundamentally misunderstand what military strength means in the 21st century. Britain has deliberately crafted a military that punches far above its weight, focusing on technological sophistication, strategic partnerships, elite force multipliers, and the ability to operate seamlessly within the most advanced alliance structures in history. Where America has built a force for global dominance, Britain has built a force for strategic influence and specialized excellence. The nuclear dimension reveals the most profound aspect of this comparison. Both nations possess submarine-based nuclear deterrence that guarantee their sovereignty and provide the ultimate insurance policy against existential threats. The United States operates 14 Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines, each capable of carrying 24 Trident II D5 missiles with multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles. The American nuclear triad also includes land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles and strategic bombers, providing redundancy and flexibility that no adversary could hope to neutralize in a first strike. Britain's nuclear deterrent rests entirely with 4 Vanguard-class submarines, always with at least one on patrol at any given moment, carrying 16 Trident II D5 missiles acquired through a unique arrangement with the United States. This relationship exemplifies the complex interdependence between the two nations, where Britain maintains sovereign control over when and how to launch its nuclear weapons, but relies on American technology and maintenance infrastructure. The British approach reflects a fundamental strategic calculation. Continuous at-sea deterrence provides invulnerable second strike capability without the enormous expense of maintaining land-based missiles and strategic bomber fleets. Critics argue this makes Britain dependent on American goodwill, while supporters note that the system has provided credible deterrence for decades at a fraction of the cost of a full triad. Both nations understand that nuclear weapons exist not to be used, but to prevent their use by others. And in this regard, both maintain sufficient capability to deter any rational adversary. Naval power demonstrates starkly different philosophies of maritime dominance. The United States Navy remains the most powerful naval force in human history, with its carrier strike groups serving as floating symbols of American power capable of projecting air power anywhere on Earth within days. Each American supercarrier carries more aircraft than many nations possess in their entire air forces, supported by guided missile cruisers and destroyers equipped with Aegis combat systems that can track and engage hundreds of targets simultaneously. American submarines, both attack and ballistic missile variants, operate in every ocean, gathering intelligence, deterring adversaries, and maintaining the ability to strike targets thousands of miles inland with cruise missiles. The amphibious fleet provides the capability to land marine expeditionary units on hostile shores, while the Navy's logistics tail enables sustained operations far from American ports. This force structure reflects America's geographical reality as a continent-sized nation separated from potential adversaries by vast oceans, requiring a Navy capable of controlling sea lanes and establishing forward presence. The Royal Navy, though dramatically smaller, maintains capabilities that most nations cannot match. The Queen Elizabeth-class carriers, while lacking the catapults and nuclear power of American supercarriers, carry F-35B Lightning II stealth fighters that represent the cutting edge of naval aviation. These ships deploy with supporting Type 45 destroyers equipped with sophisticated air defense systems and Type 23 frigates for anti-submarine warfare, forming carrier strike groups capable of independent action or integration into larger NATO operations. Britain's submarine force deserves particular attention. The Astute-class attack submarines represent some of the most advanced undersea platforms in the world, quieter than their American Virginia-class counterparts according to some assessments, equipped with Tomahawk cruise missiles and Spearfish torpedoes, and capable of remaining submerged for months while gathering intelligence or positioning for strike operations. The Royal Navy has maintained continuous at-sea nuclear deterrence for over 50 years without a single day's interruption, an operational achievement that speaks to institutional competence and strategic commitment. Yet Britain struggles with force structure, lacking the numbers to maintain global presence while also protecting home waters and fulfilling NATO commitments. The Royal Navy of today fields fewer ships than at any point since the early 20th century, a reflection of both budget constraints and the increasing cost of technologically sophisticated platforms. Air power reveals similar patterns of American quantitative dominance and British qualitative excellence. The United States Air Force operates the world's largest fleet of fifth-generation fighters, with hundreds of F-22 Raptors and F-35A Lightning IIs providing air superiority capabilities that no adversary can match. American strategic bombers, including B-2 Spirit stealth bombers and B-52 Stratofortresses that have served for over 70 years with continual upgrades, can strike anywhere on Earth with conventional or nuclear weapons. The Air Force's tanker fleet enables global reach, while transport aircraft like the C-17 Globemaster and C-5 Galaxy can deploy entire brigades to distant continents within days. Unmanned platforms, from Predators and Reapers conducting counter-terrorism strikes to the experimental X-37B spaceplane, extend American air power into new domains. The Navy and Marine Corps operate their own air wings, with hundreds of additional fighters and attack aircraft operating from carriers and amphibious assault ships. This overwhelming aerial armada reflects American strategic culture, which has emphasized air power as a relatively low-casualty method of projecting force since the Gulf War demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of precision airstrikes. The Royal Air Force, though operating a fraction of America's aircraft numbers, maintains capabilities that ensure Britain remains a first-tier military power. The RAF's Typhoon fighters, developed through European cooperation, provide advanced air defense and multi-role capabilities, while the F-35B Lightning Décieux, shared with the Royal Navy, represent Britain's commitment to stealth technology and interoperability with American forces. British air power emphasizes intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, with platforms like the Shadow R1 and Sentinel R1 providing battlefield awareness that shapes coalition operations. The RAF's transport fleet, though smaller than America's, includes modern C-17s and A400M Atlas aircraft, capable of strategic and tactical airlift. British pilots are renowned for their professionalism and training standards, often serving as instructors for American and Allied aviators. The integration of British and American air operations in conflicts from Iraq to Libya to Syria demonstrates a level of tactical cooperation that no other nations have achieved. Yet numbers matter, particularly in sustained operations. The RAF struggled to maintain continuous combat air patrols over Libya in 2011, requiring American tanker support and eventually scaling back operations due to aircraft availability. This highlights the fundamental challenge facing British military power: exquisite capabilities in small numbers that limit operational tempo and strategic flexibility. Special Operations Forces reveal an area where British capabilities more closely approach American levels despite vast differences in overall military size. The United States Special Operations Command oversees approximately 70,000 personnel across Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, Rangers, Delta Force, Air Force Special Operations, and Marine Raiders, with an annual budget that exceeds the entire defense spending of many nations. These forces have been at the forefront of America's post-9/11 counterterrorism campaigns, conducting thousands of raids, training foreign militaries, gathering intelligence, and executing direct action missions across multiple continents. The sophistication of American special operations is exemplified by missions like the Bin Laden raid, which required stealth helicopters, real-time satellite intelligence, and split-second coordination across multiple agencies. The ability to project elite forces anywhere on Earth within hours, supported by dedicated aviation, intelligence assets, and rapid reaction forces, gives America unmatched capability for precision military action below the threshold of conventional warfare. Britain's special forces, particularly the Special Air Service and Special Boat Service, are regarded as among the finest in the world, with reputations built over decades of operations from the Iranian embassy siege to the Falklands War to contemporary counterterrorism. British Special Forces pioneered many tactics that American units later adopted, and they maintain a culture of operational security that makes them nearly invisible to the public despite constant deployment. The integration between SAS and Delta Force, and between SBS and SEAL Team 6, is so complete that they regularly operate together in combined task forces, sharing intelligence and conducting joint raids in places like Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan. British Special Forces benefit from the UK's extensive intelligence networks, particularly signals intelligence through GCHQ and human intelligence through MI6, providing targeting information that shapes special operations across the alliance. The proportion of British military resources devoted to special operations is higher than the American ratio, reflecting a strategic emphasis on elite, flexible forces capable of outsized impact. Yet even in special operations, scale matters. American Special Operations Forces can deploy simultaneously to dozens of countries, while maintaining training and readiness for major operations, whereas British forces must carefully prioritize commitments due to limited manpower. Cyber capabilities and space operations represent the newest domains of military competition, where both nations are racing to maintain advantages even as the rules of engagement remain poorly defined. The United States Cyber Command, elevated to a full unified combatant command, conducts offensive and defensive operations across global networks, while the National Security Agency collects signals intelligence on a scale unprecedented in history. American cyber operations have reportedly disabled Iranian nuclear centrifuges, disrupted North Korean missile programs, and penetrated Russian and Chinese military networks, though official acknowledgement of such operations remains rare. The establishment of the United States Space Force reflects American determination to protect satellite networks essential for navigation, communications, and precision weapons, while potentially deploying capabilities to deny adversaries similar advantages. American companies like SpaceX have revolutionized space access, enabling rapid satellite deployment that enhances both military and civilian capabilities. The integration of cyber and space operations with traditional military domains creates what American strategists call multi-domain operations, where advantages in one sphere enable effects across all others. Britain's Government Communications Headquarters, or GCHQ, operates as a partner to the NSA within the Five Eyes intelligence alliance, conducting sophisticated cyber operations despite having a fraction of American resources. British cyber capabilities focus on identifying and disrupting threats, from state-sponsored espionage to terrorist propaganda networks, while protecting critical national infrastructure from attack. The National Cyber Force, jointly operated by GCHQ and the Ministry of Defense, conducts offensive operations that remain largely classified, but reportedly include disrupting terrorist communications and degrading adversary capabilities. Britain's approach to cyber warfare emphasizes working through international institutions to establish norms of responsible behavior even while developing capabilities for offensive action. In space, Britain relies heavily on American capabilities while developing indigenous satellite systems for military communications and intelligence. The recent establishment of UK Space Command signals growing recognition that space is a military domain requiring dedicated forces and strategy. Yet Britain faces challenges in cyber and space that money alone cannot solve. The global technology sector is dominated by American and Chinese companies, with European alternatives struggling for market share. This means that even sophisticated British capabilities depend on technology supply chains that could be disrupted in major conflicts, creating strategic vulnerabilities that adversaries might exploit. Global basing and force projection capabilities demonstrate the operational consequences of budgetary and strategic differences between the two nations. The United States maintains a network of bases and facilities spanning every continent except Antarctica, with major installations in Germany, Japan, South Korea, Italy, the United Kingdom, Bahrain, Qatar, and Diego Garcia, along with rotational presence in Poland, the Baltics, Australia, and numerous other locations. This global infrastructure enables American forces to respond to crises within hours rather than days or weeks, pre-positioning equipment and maintaining forward-deployed forces that can immediately engage threats. The logistics network supporting this presence includes military sealift and airlift capabilities that can deploy division-sized forces across oceans, sustaining them indefinitely through a combination of host nation support and military supply chains. American bases also serve diplomatic functions, reassuring allies and deterring adversaries through visible presence. The costs of maintaining this empire of bases are enormous, consuming resources that might otherwise fund modernization or readiness, but the strategic advantages are equally significant. When Russian forces invaded Ukraine, American troops based in Germany and Poland could immediately reinforce NATO's eastern flank. When tensions rise in the Pacific, American forces in Japan and Guam can demonstrate resolve without lengthy deployments. Britain's global military presence has contracted dramatically from the empire's heights when British forces garrisoned outposts from Singapore to Gibraltar to the Falklands. Today, permanent British bases exist primarily in Cyprus, Gibraltar, the Falkland Islands, and Diego Garcia, shared with the United States. Britain maintains small deployments in Brunei, Kenya, and several other locations, but nothing approaching the American network. The Royal Navy's lack of overseas bases limits the sustained operations of the carrier strike groups, requiring either host nation support or intensive logistics efforts to maintain deployments. This constrained footprint reflects both budget realities and strategic choices. Britain has instead emphasized its ability to deploy forces rapidly when needed, rather than maintaining permanent presence, relying on airlift and sealift to project power during crises. British forces deployed to Estonia as part of NATO's enhanced forward presence demonstrate this approach, where rotational deployments provide alliance reassurance without the costs of permanent basing. The British military also emphasizes multilateral frameworks, operating through NATO, the United Nations, and bilateral partnerships rather than pursuing unilateral presence. This approach maximizes British influence by positioning UK forces as enabling capabilities within larger coalitions, providing specialized skills like air defense, amphibious operations, or intelligence that make coalition operations more effective. Industrial capacity and defense production highlight another dimension where historical trajectories have created vast disparities. The American defense industrial base includes companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, and Raytheon, which collectively employ hundreds of thousands of workers and generate over $400 billion in annual revenue. These companies produce everything from fighter aircraft to submarines to missiles to satellites, maintaining production lines that can surge output during emergencies. American shipyards currently have attack submarines, aircraft carriers, destroyers, and amphibious ships under construction simultaneously, while aviation plants are producing hundreds of F-35 fighters annually for the United States and partner nations. The integration of commercial technology sectors with defense production creates innovation pipelines where advances in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and materials science rapidly transition into military applications. The American approach to defense production emphasizes competition between contractors, technology transfer between military and civilian sectors, and long-term investments in research and development that may not yield operational systems for decades. This creates waste and cost overruns that critics regularly denounce, but it also produces technological breakthroughs that maintain American advantages. British defense industry has consolidated dramatically over recent decades, with BAE Systems emerging as the dominant domestic producer alongside international partnerships for major systems. Britain no longer produces main battle tanks domestically, having ended Challenger production, and relies on international cooperation for fighter development, as seen with the Typhoon program. British shipyards build the Royal Navy's submarines and surface combatants, but production rates are slow compared to American or Chinese yards, with years elapsing between individual ship launches. The F-35 program exemplifies Britain's approach to defense industry in the 21st century, where British companies manufacture 15% of every F-35 produced worldwide, generating revenue and maintaining industrial skills while accepting that Britain cannot independently develop fifth-generation fighters. British defense industry excels in niches, from Rolls-Royce marine nuclear reactors to BAE Systems combat systems and Thales air defense radars, but lacks the scale to compete with American or Chinese firms across all domains. Brexit has complicated Britain's participation in European defense initiatives, creating uncertainty about future collaborative programs even as the imperative for European cooperation grows stronger given resource constraints. The fundamental challenge is that modern military systems require investments of tens of billions of dollars over decades, which only the largest economies can sustain independently. Britain must choose between domestic production that maintains industrial capacity but produces small quantities at high costs, or foreign procurement that saves money but erodes indigenous capabilities. Alliance structures and force integration reveal areas where British influence exceeds what raw military power might suggest. Britain remains one of only 3 NATO members spending above 2% of GDP on defense, providing credibility when advocating for alliance positions. British forces serve as the cornerstone of NATO's high readiness forces, with a British general currently commanding NATO's Rapid Reaction Force. The UK-US special relationship, though sometimes overstated by British politicians, reflects genuine military integration beyond what exists between any other nations. British and American forces share intelligence seamlessly, conduct joint exercises regularly, and have developed interoperable communication systems that enable combined operations without the friction that typically plagues coalitions. British liaison officers are embedded within American military headquarters, while American officers serve in British command structures, creating networks of personal relationships that facilitate cooperation during crises. Britain's permanent seat on the UN Security Council, though acquired through post-World War II arrangements that no longer reflect contemporary power distributions, provides diplomatic influence that shapes international responses to conflicts. Britain leverages these alliance positions to amplify its military power, ensuring that British perspectives shape NATO strategy and that UK forces serve in command positions within multilateral operations. The United States benefits from its alliances but is less dependent on them for core military capabilities. American strategy has long emphasized the ability to act unilaterally when necessary, even while preferring coalition operations for political legitimacy and burden sharing. This creates tensions within NATO, where allies sometimes feel the United States acts without adequate consultation, while Americans question whether allies are contributing their fair share to collective defense. The American security guarantee to NATO Europe, enshrined in Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, underpins European security in ways that allow countries like Germany to spend less on defense than they otherwise would. American presidents from Obama through Trump to Biden have pushed European allies to increase defense spending with varying degrees of diplomatic finesse, reflecting frustration that the burden of defending the democratic world falls disproportionately on American taxpayers. The war in Ukraine has partially addressed these concerns, with European defense spending increasing as the threat from Russia becomes undeniable. Yet fundamental questions remain about whether European nations, including Britain, possess the industrial capacity and political will to defend themselves without American support. The blunt reality is that without American nuclear guarantees, air defense systems, intelligence capabilities, and rapid reinforcement capacity, European security would be dramatically more precarious. Manpower, recruitment, and retention trends create concerning challenges for both nations in different ways. The United States military struggles with recruitment shortfalls, with the Army missing its recruiting goals by thousands of soldiers annually, forcing difficult choices about force structure and readiness. The all-volunteer force, created after Vietnam to eliminate the political costs of conscription, requires continuous recruitment of young people willing to accept military discipline, frequent relocations, and potential combat deployments for salaries that often lag private sector alternatives. American society has become increasingly disconnected from its military, with less than 1% of Americans serving and military service concentrated in certain regions and demographic groups. This creates a civil-military divide that concerns military leaders, who worry that future conflicts might lack public support if most Americans have no personal connection to those fighting. Simultaneously, the increasing technological sophistication of military systems requires personnel with advanced education and technical skills who have lucrative civilian alternatives. The American military has responded with improved pay and benefits, streamlined recruiting processes, and efforts to accommodate family needs. But demographic trends suggest recruitment challenges will intensify as the population ages and the labor market tightens. Britain faces even more acute manpower challenges, with the British Army falling below 75,000 active personnel, the smallest size in centuries, while recruitment continues to fall short of requirements. The Royal Navy and Royal Air Force similarly struggle to maintain manning levels, creating readiness problems as ships and aircraft lack crews even when hardware is available. British military compensation remains less competitive than private sector alternatives, while the demands of military life, including family separations during deployments, deter many potential recruits. The British military has attempted various recruitment reforms, including outsourcing recruitment to private contractors and launching advertising campaigns emphasizing personal development and adventure, but results have disappointed. Some analysts suggest Britain should reconsider the size of its armed forces, accepting that a nation of 67 million people cannot sustain forces structured for a larger population and broader imperial commitments. Others argue that proper compensation and working conditions would solve recruitment problems, pointing to competition from civilian employers as the real issue. The deeper question is whether democratic societies accustomed to peace can maintain large standing militaries without conscription, or whether future military structures will rely more heavily on technology and smaller numbers of highly skilled professionals supported by reserves who can be mobilized during emergencies. Modernization programs and future capabilities reveal both nations racing to adapt to changing character of warfare while facing fiscal constraints. The United States has embarked on the most extensive military modernization in a generation, developing hypersonic missiles that can strike targets thousands of miles away in minutes, directed energy weapons that could revolutionize air defense by using lasers to shoot down incoming missiles and aircraft, artificial intelligence systems that promise to accelerate targeting and decision-making, and autonomous platforms ranging from unmanned submarines to loyal wingman aircraft that operate alongside manned fighters. The Army is developing long-range precision fires to threaten adversary ships and bases, while the Navy pursues unmanned surface and subsurface vehicles that could transform naval warfare. Space-based sensors and weapons, though politically controversial, receive increasing investment as potential adversaries demonstrate anti-satellite capabilities. The sheer breadth of American modernization efforts reflects both the technological sophistication of potential adversaries, particularly China, and the institutional capacity to pursue multiple high-risk programs simultaneously. Not all will succeed, but even partial success across this portfolio would extend American military advantages for decades. Britain's modernization efforts are necessarily more selective, focusing on capabilities that provide maximum impact within budget constraints. The Tempest program aims to develop a sixth-generation fighter in partnership with Italy, Sweden, and Japan, maintaining British expertise in combat aviation while spreading development costs. The Dreadnought-class submarines will replace the Vanguard-class ballistic missile boats, maintaining continuous at-sea nuclear deterrence into the second half of the century. Type 26 and Type 31 frigates will gradually replace aging surface combatants, though at production rates that leave capability gaps. The British Army is acquiring Ajax armored vehicles and Boxer infantry fighting vehicles while upgrading Challenger 3 tanks, though these programs have faced delays and technical problems that highlight the difficulties of complex defense procurement. British modernization emphasizes integration with allies, particularly the United States, ensuring that British forces can operate seamlessly within coalition frameworks. This approach makes strategic sense given resource constraints but creates dependencies that could become vulnerabilities if alliance structures weaken or divergent national interests emerge. The fundamental tension in British defense planning is between maintaining full-spectrum capabilities across land, sea, air, space, and cyber domains versus accepting specialization and reliance on allies for capabilities Britain cannot afford independently. Economic factors and fiscal sustainability weigh heavily on both nations' military futures in ways that pure capability comparisons obscure. The American defense budget, while enormous in absolute terms, consumes approximately 3% of GDP, lower than Cold War levels and sustainable given the size of the American economy. Yet the United States faces fiscal challenges from rising entitlement spending, infrastructure needs, and political polarization that makes long-term budget planning difficult. Defense spending competes with domestic priorities including healthcare, education, and social programs, creating political pressures to constrain military budgets even as threats multiply. The Congressional Budget Office projects that absent policy changes, interest on the national debt will exceed defense spending within decades, consuming resources that might fund military modernization. Some strategists argue America should reduce global commitments to match sustainable resource levels, withdrawing from peripheral conflicts and focusing on great power competition with China. Others insist that American security depends on maintaining global presence, and that reduced engagement would invite aggression that ultimately costs more to contain. These debates will shape American military power, regardless of technological developments or strategic concepts. Britain's fiscal situation creates more immediate constraints, with defense spending at GDP's 2% threshold, representing a political choice that could shift with changing governments or economic downturns. The British economy's slower growth compared to historical norms limits defense budget increases even as threats multiply. Brexit's economic impacts, still unfolding, may further constrain resources available for defense. Britain must fund nuclear deterrent modernization, carrier strike group operations, cyber defense, special operations, and contributions to NATO, while also addressing personnel costs and equipment maintenance that consume the majority of defense budgets before new capabilities can be purchased. The Integrated Review of Security, Defense, Development, and Foreign Policy conducted in 2021 attempted to align British strategy with realistic resources, but critics argued it was overly optimistic about technology compensating for force structure cuts. The fundamental question is whether Britain can maintain credible military power on a defense budget of roughly $68 billion, or whether further decline is inevitable without either significant budget increases or radical changes in strategy. British defense planning must balance multiple imperatives: maintaining the nuclear deterrent, fulfilling NATO commitments, protecting the homeland, supporting counterterrorism operations, and pursuing global Britain engagement. These cannot all be fully resourced simultaneously, forcing difficult trade-offs that risk creating a military that can do many things poorly rather than fewer things well. Technological innovation and adaptation to new forms of warfare will likely determine future military effectiveness as much as traditional metrics of ships, aircraft, and soldiers. The United States has pioneered military innovation from nuclear weapons to stealth technology, to precision-guided munitions to networked warfare. But maintaining this edge requires continuous investment in research, tolerance for failure, and institutional cultures that embrace change. The American military's size sometimes impedes innovation, as bureaucratic processes slow the fielding of new technologies and legacy systems consume resources that might fund experimentation. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan diverted attention from great power competition, leaving capability gaps that only became apparent when Russia and China demonstrated advanced capabilities. American innovation culture increasingly depends on commercial technology companies that are global in orientation and may resist serving exclusively military purposes. The integration of artificial intelligence into military systems promises revolutionary changes, but raises ethical questions about autonomous weapons and risks of accidents or miscalculation. Hypersonic weapons could undermine strategic stability by reducing warning time for nuclear strikes. Cyber weapons blur lines between war and peace, enabling attacks that cause destruction without kinetic force. The American military must innovate not just technologically, but institutionally, developing operational concepts, organizational structures, and strategic thinking appropriate for these emerging realities. Britain's approach to military innovation emphasizes niche capabilities and leveraging partnership relationships to access broader innovation ecosystems. British defense planning has identified artificial intelligence, autonomy, directed energy, and advanced materials as priority technology areas where targeted investment can maintain advantages. The Defense Science and Technology Laboratory works with academia and industry to develop emerging capabilities, while the new Defense and Security Accelerator fast-tracks promising technologies from concept to prototype. Britain benefits from world-class universities and a vibrant technology sector, though these advantages are shared across Western democracies and do not uniquely favor British military innovation. The loyal wingman concept, where unmanned aircraft operate alongside manned fighters, could multiply the effectiveness of Britain's limited fighter fleet. Autonomous naval vessels might provide persistence in tracking adversary submarines without the costs of crewed platforms. Artificial intelligence could enhance the effectiveness of British intelligence collection and analysis, identifying patterns and threats that human analysts might miss. Yet innovation requires tolerance for failure and willingness to discard legacy systems that may still have years of service life. Cultural changes that military institutions struggle to implement. Britain must also navigate tensions between developing sovereign capabilities that maintain strategic autonomy and partnering with allies to access technologies Britain cannot develop alone. Hypothetical scenarios illuminate how these capabilities might function in actual conflicts. Consider a crisis in the Baltic states, where Russian forces mass on NATO's borders in a scenario reminiscent of 2014 Ukraine, but directed at alliance members rather than a non-aligned neighbor. American forces would provide the backbone of NATO's response, with the 82nd Airborne Division deploying within days, followed by armored brigades from bases in Germany and the continental United States. American air power would establish air superiority, while Navy carrier strike groups operating in the North Atlantic and Mediterranean position to conduct strikes if deterrence fails. American cyber operations would target Russian command and control systems, while space-based intelligence would track force movements. This massive deployment would occur through established procedures practiced in exercises, with pre-positioned equipment and host nation support, enabling rapid buildup. British forces would deploy alongside Americans, with the Army contributing an armored brigade, the RAF providing Typhoon fighters and transport aircraft, and the Royal Navy potentially positioning forces to protect sea lanes. British Special Forces would operate behind potential front lines, while intelligence networks would provide targeting information. Britain's contribution would be smaller than America's but significant, demonstrating alliance solidarity and providing specialized capabilities. The scenario illustrates how American and British military power function in practice, with American mass and reach providing deterrent weight, while British contributions enhance overall capability and share burdens. Consider alternatively a peacekeeping scenario in sub-Saharan Africa, where civil conflict threatens regional stability and humanitarian disaster looms. Britain has historical connections and military experience in Africa that would make UK forces natural candidates for leadership roles. British Special Forces could deploy rapidly to assess the situation and advise local forces, while RAF transport aircraft could establish an air bridge for humanitarian supplies. A battalion-sized ground force, supported by Apache attack helicopters, could protect aid workers and establish secure zones. Royal Navy ships could provide offshore support, including helicopter operations and medical facilities. Yet Britain would likely struggle to sustain even this limited deployment for extended periods without either American support or contributions from other nations. The United States might provide strategic airlift, intelligence and surveillance assets, and logistics support even without deploying ground forces, enabling a British-led operation that would be impossible for the UK to conduct independently. This scenario highlights British capabilities for leadership in small to medium-scale operations, but also the dependencies that constrain independent action. The political dimension matters as much as military capability, with former colonial powers like Britain sometimes facing legitimacy challenges that make African Union or United Nations mandates essential. A cyber warfare scenario reveals different dynamics. Suppose a sophisticated adversary launches attacks against financial systems, electrical grids, and communications networks in both the United States and United Kingdom, causing disruption without clear attribution. Both nations would respond through cyber defense teams working to identify attack vectors and restore systems while simultaneously conducting forensic analysis to attribute the attacks. The United States would likely achieve attribution faster, given NSA's capabilities, but might face political constraints on responses if evidence remained circumstantial. Britain would coordinate closely with the U.S. through Five Eyes intelligence sharing, potentially providing complementary intelligence that confirms attribution. Both nations would face questions about proportional response and escalation risks, as cyber attacks could warrant kinetic retaliation, but might also be addressed through sanctions, diplomatic pressure, or counter-cyber operations. The scenario illustrates how 21st-century conflicts may unfold in domains where traditional military advantages matter less than technical sophistication, institutional coordination, and strategic judgment. American and British capabilities in cyber warfare are likely closer to parity than in conventional forces, though the scale of American intelligence operations provides advantages that are difficult to quantify. A Pacific contingency involving Taiwan would test these capabilities in the most challenging scenario imaginable. American forces would bear primary responsibility for defending Taiwan against Chinese attack, with carrier strike groups, submarines, air wings from Japan and Guam, and potentially ground forces engaging in the most intense combat since World War II. Britain could contribute a carrier strike group to the region, releasing American forces for frontline duties or providing presence in other areas. British submarines could gather intelligence and potentially conduct strikes, while RAF tankers and transport aircraft could support American operations. Yet the distances involved, the scale of forces required, and the sophistication of Chinese capabilities would strain British military capacity to its limits. Britain would need to balance contributions to Pacific operations against NATO commitments, homeland defense, and other global responsibilities. The scenario illustrates a fundamental reality of contemporary geopolitics. While Britain remains a military power of global reach, the weight of great power conflict in Asia would fall primarily on the United States. British contributions would be welcomed but not essential for military outcomes, unlike in European scenarios, where British forces provide crucial capabilities. This reflects not British weakness, but the geographic and strategic realities of the 21st century, where the principal military competition occurs in the Indo-Pacific between the United States and China. Strategic culture and military ethos shape how these capabilities are employed in ways that pure capability inventories cannot capture. American strategic culture emphasizes technological solutions to military problems, overwhelming force when engaged, and the belief that American power serves benevolent purposes. This creates a military that is simultaneously highly capable and sometimes surprisingly ineffective, as seen in Afghanistan and Iraq, where military victories failed to translate into stable political outcomes. American forces are trained for decisive operations against conventional adversaries, with doctrine that emphasizes speed, shock, and synchronized operations across all domains. Yet, irregular warfare, stabilization operations, and counterinsurgency require different skills, patience, and cultural understanding that conventional military training may not adequately develop. The American military has oscillated between embracing these missions as central and rejecting them as distractions from preparing for great power war. This tension will continue influencing American military effectiveness, regardless of budget or technology. American civil-military relations, with strong norms of civilian control and military professionals who generally avoid domestic politics, have served the nation well, but face stresses from political polarization and questions about whether current military structures suit contemporary challenges. British strategic culture reflects different historical experiences, with imperial policing creating institutional memory of operating among populations with minimal force, building local partnerships, and achieving political objectives through military presence rather than battlefield victory. British forces emphasize professionalism, discipline, and the regimental system that creates unit cohesion and historical continuity. The British Army's emphasis on infantry, its experience in Northern Ireland, and deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan created expertise in counterinsurgency that American forces later sought to replicate. British military culture values understatement over boastfulness, with success measured by missions accomplished quietly rather than celebrated publicly. Yet British forces also struggle with their own challenges, including equipment shortages, recruiting difficulties, and questions about whether the military's culture adequately reflects the diversity of contemporary British society. The integration of women into combat roles, still controversial in some circles, proceeds alongside debates about standards and effectiveness. British civil-military relations benefit from traditions where serving officers avoid political controversies, and retired officers generally maintain discretion. But budget pressures create tensions when military leaders warn publicly about capability gaps. Leadership in international institutions and normative frameworks represents a domain where British influence has historically exceeded military capability. Britain helped create the United Nations, NATO, the Commonwealth, and numerous other multilateral organizations that shape international security. British diplomats and military officers have led international missions, drafted Security Council resolutions, and advocated for rule-based international order. This institutional leadership has amplified British power, allowing the UK to shape international responses to conflicts in ways that military force alone could not achieve. American leadership in international institutions is more ambivalent, reflecting both the immense power that makes institutions valuable for legitimizing American actions and the unilateralist strand in American political culture that questions whether international organizations constrain American freedom of action. The Trump administration's skepticism toward NATO, withdrawal from various international agreements, and America First rhetoric created questions about American commitment to alliances that the Biden administration has worked to repair. The fundamental tension in American grand strategy is between acting as a global hegemon that bears disproportionate burdens for international order and adopting a more restrained posture that shifts responsibility to allies and accepts that not all problems require American solutions. Britain has consistently advocated for the former approach, arguing that American engagement makes Britain and its allies more secure. But American domestic politics may make this unsustainable regardless of military capabilities. The future of American and British military power will be shaped by factors that extend beyond defense planning, including demographic changes, economic performance, technological innovation, political stability, and societal cohesion. The United States faces challenges from political polarization that complicates long-term strategic planning, rising inequality that strains social cohesion, and questions about whether American democracy itself remains resilient. Yet America retains enormous advantages, including favorable geography, vast economic and technological capacity, relatively positive demographic trends compared to other developed nations, and cultural dynamism that continues attracting talent worldwide. The American military will likely remain the world's most powerful for decades, But the margin of superiority may narrow if adversaries invest effectively, while American budgets face constraints. The rise of China presents a competitor with economic scale comparable to the United States, technological sophistication approaching American levels in some areas, and apparent political will to challenge American primacy. Whether America maintains military superiority over China will depend not just on defense budgets, but on educational systems, infrastructure investment, innovation ecosystems, and alliance management. Britain's future military power is harder to predict, depending on how the nation adapts to post-Brexit realities, whether economic performance supports defense investment, and how effectively British strategy balances competing priorities. Britain could potentially increase defense spending significantly if political will existed and threats became more pressing, though this would require difficult choices about taxation and domestic spending. Britain could alternatively accept further reductions in military capability, becoming primarily a niche contributor to alliances rather than maintaining full-spectrum forces. The third possibility is that Britain finds innovative ways to maintain disproportionate influence through technology, partnerships, and strategic positioning rather than mass. British military power will likely remain significant, but not sufficient for independent action in major conflicts, making the alliance with America and partnerships across NATO and beyond essential for British security. The special relationship, though always more important to Britain than America, will likely endure because it serves both nations' interests, providing America with a reliable ally whose military forces are genuinely interoperable, and providing Britain with influence in Washington and access to capabilities Britain cannot generate independently. The comparison between American and British military power ultimately reveals not a simple hierarchy, but a complex relationship where quantitative differences coexist with qualitative partnerships, and where both nations face challenges that exceed what military force can solve. America's overwhelming military superiority on paper must be weighed against strategic overextension, fiscal pressures, political divisions, and the difficulty of translating military power into favorable political outcomes. Britain's much smaller military must be understood in context of sophisticated capabilities, alliance leadership, intelligence networks, and strategic judgment that amplify influence beyond raw numbers. Both nations confront the reality that 21st-century conflicts are shaped by factors from cyber operations to economic interdependence to information warfare that complicate traditional military metrics. Both face recruitment challenges in societies where military service is uncommon and where young people have alternatives that may seem more attractive. Both must innovate institutionally and technologically to address threats that are evolving faster than military bureaucracies typically adapt. Both grapple with questions about whether their military structures suit contemporary challenges or reflect legacy decisions from different strategic circumstances. The sun sets over the North Atlantic, and the waters that saw the aircraft carrier and submarine at this documentary's beginning now reflect the fading light as these two military machines continue their patrols, symbols of enduring power, but also of the uncertainties ahead. American and British military forces will remain formidable in ways that most nations cannot match, with capabilities spanning from nuclear deterrence to special operations to cyber warfare. They will continue operating together in ways that reflect shared democratic values, historical bonds, and mutual interests even as they navigate changing global power distributions and domestic pressures. The question is not whether the United States possesses more military power than the United Kingdom, a fact so obvious it hardly bears stating, but whether either nation's military power will prove adequate for the challenges ahead. Those challenges include deterring great power conflict while managing the risks of escalation, addressing transnational threats from terrorism to climate change that respect no borders, maintaining alliances and partnerships essential for collective security, and preserving the democratic values that give moral purpose to military power. In these endeavors, American strength and British strategic acumen, American resources and British experience, American reach and British partnerships may prove complementary rather than competitive. The true measure of their military power may ultimately be not how they compare to each other, but how effectively they work together to shape a world where military force exists not to dominate, but to deter, not to conquer, but to protect, not to divide nations, but to preserve the peace that allows free societies to flourish. The carriers and submarines continue their endless patrols, and the questions they embody about power, purpose, and the future of democratic nations remain as deep and dark as the waters they traverse.